We are back for another video, and this one will be about balancing stress hormones. So supplements and their benefits and their drawbacks. We see a lot of people talking about you need to take this, you need to take that. Hey, go out and do 10 million things before you even start a day. And then before your midday, take this supplement, and at night takes that supplement. And more often than not, they have missed the first ever steps that we talked about in our first video. Acknowledge where you are. Run diagnostics to understand, do you even need anything at this point? Maybe you are superhuman. You don't need anything at all. But more often than not, we come across that people misunderstand what actually stress hormone is. And I know you probably come across a lot that people talk to you that I'm always stressed out and this and that. Should I do something about my cortisol? So let's unwrap all this. What are the roles of stress hormones to begin with, and then touch up on most common supplements and everything else.
Yeah. Well, so first off, stress hormones, right? Everybody has a negative connotation around them. You know, there's a negative association with stress hormones. Oh, my cortisol is really high. Honestly, I have yet to really see, like in blood work, somebody where it's like, wow, like I can count on one hand in the last 3 years where I've legitimately seen a concerning cortisol number that's high. So first off, it's rare, okay? Most often when it is that high, it's very acute and it should be appropriate. And when it stays up that high for a long time, it's almost always that you see it actually low or low normal. A perfect example is people that suffer from PTSD. Their high cortisol event happened a long time ago, but now they come back, from wherever their experience is and all of that, and they think their cortisol is high. It's actually not. In fact, what's going on is their body is maladapted to respond to stress. And that's a problem, right? You actually want a nice, healthy spikes of cortisol when you are stressed and then a big lowering. But the problem is if you have already had the stress response, right? PTSD as an example, you had that stress response months ago or even a year ago, and now you start thinking that you're treating your PTSD with ashwagandha, for example, to lower your cortisol even more because you're stressed out. That would be a net negative. You're actually blunting the recovery of what you should be doing, because any stress response is needed for daily activity. It's no different than training. When we go in and train, we want a stress response that is appropriate. So not only can taking things like ashwagandha not be good for your psychology and your overall well-being, it can actually be detrimental for your physical goals. You're not going to get a stress response appropriate to like weight training, right? That's what we're normally talking about with our clients. You're not going to get that if your cortisol response is not appropriate. When you go in and train and your cortisol is lowered, guess what? You're not releasing body fat. Or in the morning, if your cortisol is subpar, you're not releasing body fat. You're going to feel low energy a lot of the time.
I have actually worked with, and I still work with guys from military, and some people have been medically diagnosed with either depression or PTSD. And funnily enough, their cortisol usually comes normal after even if they did blood test after really heavy training session. So they just their body is just bluntly not acknowledging that you are damaging me, which is crazy. And some people chase that when in reality it might actually be negative thing. You need that cortisol. So your body responds, you've been under stress, let's deal with this. But if there is no signal in telling you that something went wrong, your body just goes, yeah, let's burn down until there's nothing left of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I was going to mention is that leads us to the importance that we've been talking about the whole time, is assess your blood work, get somebody who understands what's going on so that you can properly, because somebody like that, you're not going to give them ashwagandha. That's the wrong thing to give them. You're only going to lower that response even worse. But
I think it's also important to remind everyone what we have talked and you have highlighted many times, that reading the blood test without knowing person's story, it can be actually harmful.
Yeah. So we'll get into that a little bit. So I don't have the slide of the actual sex hormone cascade, but I do think that I can explain it pretty easily, and then that will dovetail into the slide that you guys see in front of you. So it starts like this. All stress and sex hormones start at the same place. They start, most of them, the ones that matter, start with sulfated cholesterol, okay? Sulfated cholesterol then gets turned into pregnenolone. Pregnenolone then gets turned into progesterone and DHEA, okay? If you're a male, obviously pregnenolone gets turned into less progesterone, and more of that pregnenolone goes to the lighting cells in your testicles and gets turned into testosterone, right? That's the only deviation between female and male, is the amount of pregnenolone that gets turned into progesterone or gets turned into testosterone directly at that branch. But let's just assume that for all intents and purposes that's normal. So pregnenolone gets turned into progesterone or testosterone, and then the remainder of that pregnenolone gets turned into DHEA, okay? Now, a lot of people associate DHEA exclusively with sex hormones. It is also the starting point of your stress response. When you're stressed, DHEA gets turned into cortisol, okay? That is how your body understands. Let's put it this way. If you're a really stressed organism, should you be reproducing? It's probably not really, exactly, right? Like if your body is registering whatever environment, whatever thing externally affecting you is really stressing you out and causing a lot of cortisol, guess what should happen? Your sex hormones should be lowered, because you shouldn't be reproducing at this current point in time, right? You got to think of this through an evolutionary standpoint. So that's why DHEA is directly contributing to your cortisol, so that it can be emptied when you're under stress, and your sex hormones should be lowered. When you're not under stress, your DHEA is not going to be converted as much into cortisol, and more of that DHEA will be turned into your other sex hormones, testosterone, and estrogen, progesterone, and even prolactin. So that little concept there, it has a name. It's called pregnenolone steal, and you may have heard of it before. And
you have mentioned it a couple of times, I believe.
Yeah. And so, and that is the concept that I'm talking about. When you're really stressed, that is appropriate to raise cortisol as high as it needs to do to get you into whatever needs to happen. Now, another concept here is thyroid medications, right? So we already kind of explained and touched on, hey, if you're supposed to be stressed and you're not becoming stressed because you're taking a supplement that's lowering your cortisol, that is a net negative. You're not going to all of a sudden make more sex hormones, because people get misunderstood that if they stop this cortisol response, that they'll somehow produce more sex hormones. That's not how it works. That's not at all how it works. The way that it works is this first slide, or this first column here at the top. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can. So these two amino acids right here, with sunlight intervenes right here and right here on these two amino acids by breaking them into pieces, right? Amino acids are just long chains of molecules. When the sunlight hits them, they get broken up into the appropriate ones. These are the backbones to your thyroid, to your DOPA, that creates melanin, dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. When cortisol gets high, you break down your thyroid and flavonoids into DOPA and turn it into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. If you've already converted a lot of stuff from this side of the column into melanin and dopamine, and you get a stress response, more of it will, more of these will get turned into adrenaline and noradrenaline. That is what's supposed to happen. The other thing that people don't understand is noradrenaline and adrenaline can go backwards and get turned into dopamine and melanin, or all the way backwards into T3 and T4. So These are meant to be able to be swapped to one side or the other side. And that's why blunting your cortisol response is literally draining you, because it didn't go in the direction it was supposed to go, into adrenaline and noradrenaline. Therefore, that means it can't go backwards either. Basically, you blunted the natural flow of how your stress response should go. Because when you have high stress, there will be high adrenaline, high noradrenaline. Your body will register them. When you are de-stressed, right, when the event is gone, like a weight training session, it will flow backwards for T3 and T4. T3 and T4 directly interact with your cholesterol, specifically DHEA, to turn into your sex hormones. So when these flow backwards, the noradrenaline and adrenaline back into your thyroid hormones will go a little bit high, and then they will interact with your DHEA to create more sex hormones if you had an appropriate response. But if you blunted it and you never got these, then there won't be a flow backwards into the T3 and T4. You're literally undoing the possibility of a response.
I have seen this in blood tests. I have seen guys who are taking something to suppress their cortisol because they're stressed out, and then blood test comes back that everything's fine apart from their testosterone is absolutely tanked.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is more useful for your overall life? Have no sex drive or be a bit more stressed?
Correct, right. And the thing is, the more stressed you are, when you finally do de-stress, maybe you're stressed for a whole week, right? Let's just say hypothetically, you're stressed for a whole week. At some point, you're not going to be that stressed. And if you let that response happen correctly, your T3, your T4 and T3 will rise enough and interact with DHEA to turn into testosterone and estrogen, which will mitigate the stress that you had before. See, we think we're smarter than nature. We're really not. It's designed this way for a reason, because during the stressful situation, you need a lot of adrenaline and noradrenaline to be able to go back and forth between dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline so that you can think clearly, so that you can go ahead and be active and not exercise, how would I say, exploit a lot of energy, right? All your fat stores, because adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol will mobilize energy. They'll mobilize fat stores. They'll mobilize glucose from your liver. It literally is giving you the energy to get through whatever stressful event is happening, clearer thinking, etc. So blunting a cortisol response can actually make you worse at whatever you're stressed about, okay? So that is a key concept that I wanted to touch on, because I am seeing a lot of people that just come to me with consultations, and they're like, oh, I'm taking ashwagandha, I'm taking this, I'm taking melatonin at night, I'm taking all these things to counteract my stress response. And then I look at their T3 and it's like tanked. And then I look at their sex hormones and they're also tanked. And then I look at their cortisol and it's at the lower end of the range. I'm like, well, you don't have high cortisol. You should stop taking everything you're taking. And more than likely, that's what's going to fix your sex hormones and your other things like that. And almost certainly, as soon as I get them to do that, after about 8 weeks, they do have a normal cortisol, like up in the normal range in the morning. And their sex hormones start to come back. They specifically, I start to see their T3. That's the first thing to move. Remember, because it flows backwards from the right side of that screen to the center part. Yeah. Their T3 is what starts to come up first. When the T3 starts to come up, now I know, okay, T3 is now interacting with DHEA, and we should start to see a response in higher sex hormones now that we fixed their so-called high cortisol, which wasn't high to begin with because they were suppressing it so much. The other thing is, go ahead.
Now it sounds as if none of these supplements should ever be taken. So when do you actually think, hey, you need some ashwagandha, you need some melatonin? You need, we already mentioned about like jet lags, and so like extreme instances are probably some of those when you take these kind of things. But
preemptively, a lot sooner than you think, because of what I stated at the very beginning. The high cortisol, the actual really high damaging cortisol, usually happened way a long time ago. And then people are like, oh, I've been stressed for so long and I got to take some. You're probably not. You're probably just not fully, how would I say? You're just not fully letting yourself become low again, right? And so that is where they think that they need to treat it then. It's usually much more ahead of time. So for example, I deal with military personnel as well, and they go off to boot camp. Okay. So right away, I go, okay, well, start taking some ashwagandha maybe for 2 or 3 weeks before going to boot camp, so that when you go to boot camp, you have an appropriately high cortisol response that's not too high. And I'm like, and if you can take some ashwagandha with you, only take it for the first 1 or 2 weeks that you're there. About halfway through whatever time frame you're going to be there, stop taking it, so that when you come off of that, you've registered a high enough cortisol response that when you come back from that, you can now actually adapt to that response. It's almost never after the fact, and it's almost never for the full duration of the stressful event. The problem is, for normal general population people, they don't really know when that event is, right? So they are better off not doing that type of behavior of, oh, there's something out there that can lower my cortisol. What I am a fan of is helping your body dissipate that stress every single night. So how have me and you kind of elucidated that effect? By getting outside, grounding yourself, and if it is a really stressful event, cold exposure. Why? Because cold exposure is a physical mechanism that turns adrenaline and noradrenaline back into T3. Remember, that's what we want. We want, after the stress response, we want everything that was on the far right hand of the stream, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, to go backwards into T3, T4, into your thyroid hormones, so that they can interact with your DHEA. So cold is a direct mechanism that will do that. So for example, you didn't know you didn't know that you were going to have a really stressful week. Instead of, oh, I need to order some ashwagandha and I'll start taking it next week, guess what you can do literally that very first day, as soon as you're starting to experience stress? You can take a cold shower. You can take a little bit of a night, I like an isolation type cold shower, so no lights or anything like that at night. No lights, take a cold shower for about 3 minutes. That alone will relax the nervous system so that you can sleep that night, and help turn dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline back into T3, T4. So that when you wake up the next morning, you're back in a reset state so that you can do it all over again. That is really the concept of being able to deal with stress right then and there. I can't stress that enough. It's free. It's free for most people, unless you live in a really hot country. And it's just a matter of executing. It really is. And you can do it immediately. You don't have to wait for a supplement to arrive to your door. If you're traveling, you don't have to wait to try to figure out where you can get a stress hormone supplement. It's literally free and it's available anywhere. Just getting cold and taking away stimulus at night is a key concept that people need to understand, that is something that you should be able to do anytime when you feel stressed, to help yourself. And you can do it chronically for a long time, up to 8 weeks. I've seen this happen with people deployed and with people in the winter, where they use this little technique, and it works for up to 8 weeks is what I've monitored for. And their T3 levels stay nice and high, and their sex hormones stay nice and high. And I asked them, I'm like, how do you feel? And they're like, actually, I feel really good. I feel like I would not be coping with the level of stress that I have if I wasn't doing this. They're like, I would expect to be much more trashed from the level of crap that I'm putting up with every single day, that just by using some blue light blocking glasses, dimming down my lights, and getting cold every single night before bed, they're able to cope, because they're physically turning back those neurotransmitters into thyroid hormones.
Can you overdo cold showers, cold exposure, ice bath, and things like that?
Well, in a physical sense, yes, as in you can get hypothermia, right? But in this sense, like a neurological sense, no, you can't. So it's just a matter of
Because for me, cold shower now is I don't even feel it. I literally need to have 1 day a week where I shower in warm water just to feel the cold again.
Yeah, you get pretty used to it, especially anything under 10 minutes, never going to be physically harmful, no matter how cold the water is. But there are some people that are really sick that I monitor, where it's like, hey, they're taking a 30-minute ice bath, right? That you got to monitor that, right? You got to pay attention to your extremities and stuff like that. That's verging on the effect of, you might get hypothermia. But for any normal person, you know, you're not dealing with like some kind of cancer or some kind of like disease state or anything like that, and you're just using it for stress management, you don't need to use it more than 10 minutes. And at that level of cold exposure, even if it's ice water, you're not going to suffer anything. And you get used to it after about a week or so. But as far as like the neurological effects, it works for a long time, up to 8 weeks that I've noticed, and probably longer. I wouldn't say that it works forever, but I wouldn't say that it works more than like 6 months for sure. But for 8 weeks for sure, you could use that and you're not going to suffer a detriment. The other thing that I wanted to explain is in the middle slide here, we have tryptophan, okay? Tryptophan gets turned into serotonin and serotonin gets turned into melatonin. And they do that by the lack of light, right? So that's why I say remove light stimulus at night. Why? So that when you, if you've executed and gotten some daylight earlier in the day, you've turned tryptophan into serotonin in the gut. And then when you remove the light stimulus at night, serotonin gets turned into melatonin. Again, that's going to facilitate this upper level here rolling backwards, right? So it has to work together. It's not like, hey, the cold shower is going to do everything. There has to be some removal of light stimulus because that's how the day functions, right? There's light and then there's dark. But if you never experience dark appropriately, your body doesn't understand that it is now nighttime and time to recover you from the damage that you did earlier in the day.
So strategies for that, could you elaborate on getting rid of light? So that would be blue light blockers, maybe get old school light bulbs.
Yes, those are actually the easiest things that you can do are buy a lamp, right? So when it gets dark, so when the sun starts to go down, buy some lamps and use lamps instead of overhead lighting. That has to do with the structure of your eye, of how it's built. There are photoreceptors that are specific to the top of the eye versus the bottom of the eye. So blue light receptors are on the bottom of the eye. So if you have overhead lighting, it's going to hit the bottom of the eye and it's going to activate the blue light receptors much more aggressively, right, even if you have blue light. So if just by lowering the light level so that the light is coming from below, it's going to hit the top of the eye and there isn't nearly as many photoreceptors there for the blue light. So going to just a regular incandescent light bulb and putting it in a lamp puts you way ahead of overhead lighting, right? Taking it to the next step is literally just a cheap party bulb, a cheap red party bulb, and just putting that in like 3 or 4 lamps around your room. You're golden there. You don't even need to wear glasses at that point. That's what I do. I just go to the cheapest Walmart or whatever, store and buy some little tiny red party bulbs and put them in 3 or 4 lamps. And that's what I turn on at night. When the sun goes down, I turn those on and that's what I use for lighting. I don't even have to wear glasses or anything like that. And I'm not joking, within 90 minutes, I am literally feeling the effect of serotonin being turned into melatonin. And I'm starting to get groggy and sleepy. That's my cue that, hey, I have initiated the right cascades and my body is ready to start recovering me from the damage that I did earlier this day. And I just go to bed, right? If you have to do work, especially, this day and age, everybody's going to do some work on their computer, then I would say still put on some blue light blocking glasses, even if you have this light. So those are really the things that you want to manage. Now, there are
another thing I wanted to touch up. So you just explained, hey, if you need to do some work at night and you put some blue light blocking glasses, would infrared treatment do extra work for you to control all this?
Yes, I would say that that's when I use that is also when, like if I'm traveling, I brought my little infrared light box with me, just because I didn't know where I would get red light bulbs. So yeah, I use that at night. And if I do have to do some work on the computer at night, that's what I'll turn on. I'll turn that on. And then I do have software on my laptop that turns my screen orange so that less blue light is coming at me. And that usually does it. That's enough for me to be like, oh, okay, I can clearly feel that I'm getting tired. I'll get through my work here and then I'll be ready for bed. And that's really the tell. That's really the tell of like that you've done the appropriate response at night. You're starting to get groggy, your melatonin is rising, and it's early in the evening, right? Most people that have this problem that I deal with, the first thing that I see on their questionnaire is, oh, I'm going to bed at midnight. I'm like, why? Do you work at night? And they're like, no, I just can't go to sleep. I'm like, okay, well, that's a problem because it gets dark 4 hours ago and you're staying up for 4 hours later. That's 4 hours of stimulation that probably shouldn't be happening. There's something going on there that you're blunting because melatonin will not be turned from serotonin to melatonin unless it experiences zero blue light. And it takes about 90 minutes. So if you're telling me that you don't even fall asleep until midnight, that usually means that you're not even releasing melatonin until 90 minutes after you've gone to bed, because you go to bed, it's midnight, and they're like, oh, but I still get 8 hours. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't get any hormone release or any other cascades, because melatonin just isn't by itself. When melatonin rises, that signals other hormones like the production of T4 at night, which is, at the top of the screen, and T4 then and melatonin also release or help release growth hormone at night to turn into IGF-1 to recover you from other things. If melatonin doesn't get kicked off, you're blunting all of these to some degree. So, it's one of those things where people don't understand that being groggy at night is supposed to happen, and it's supposed to happen every night. And if you feel that every night and you're checking in with yourself, you're doing it right. If you're like struggling, like, hey, it's like 11 p.m. and it got dark at 9 p.m. and I'm still not sleepy, that's a problem. It means something's going on.
It's like me, my brain wakes up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's like, but we both have seen my blood test. It's like, yeah, okay, you'll survive.
Right.
But if somebody saw the blood test, they would probably be like, what on earth is wrong with this dude? So this brings me to another thing that I wanted to ask you. All this, we talked about, hey, you can check your hormones, your cortisol, DHEA, T3s, whatever. What about health markers that I personally like to check? Is one of them is HRV, and another two is deep sleep and REM sleep. Can these be predictors about how good our hormonal response will be?
Yeah, so those are getting deeper into the cascade, right? So if you're not releasing melatonin correctly, if you're not turning these hormones back, the neurotransmitters back into T4, T3, you're probably not getting as much deep sleep or REM sleep as you should be. So yes,
yeah,
for example,
mine is tip top, so I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, but yes. So, for example, you have somebody that's kind of borderline, right? Like all their values are kind of like in the middle of the range, but they're still having symptoms. If they do have access to some HRV or a sleep monitor, then you can quickly kind of decipher that. And I do have a client where literally her sex hormone panel and her thyroids, they all looked kind of normal, but she had sleep problems. Like she could literally tell, I'm just not feel like I'm getting the right sleep. She's like, I don't really know what it is. And then she showed me her sleep. She had a Whoop band, and her deep sleep was like 1 hour, and her REM sleep for the night was 30 minutes. Ooh. So yeah. So immediately, okay, I'm like, okay, well, your panel isn't all messed up, so this is probably going to resolve pretty quickly. So I had her initiate exactly what I've told you so far, and literally within 2 weeks, she went from 20 to 30 minutes of REM sleep to doubling that. She was at an hour of REM sleep, and her deep sleep had increased from about 1 hour to almost 2 hours. And immediately she goes, within a month, I literally feel like I'm recovering now. I literally feel like I'm actually sleeping. It didn't, like I said, her sex hormones and her blood panel wasn't that far off, so I knew it was going to happen pretty quickly. And within a month, she was started reporting anecdotally. And then with her Whoop band, we could see, oh yeah, it's already started to change. And now we've gotten her REM sleep up to almost an hour and a half, right? And it's just from these things. The daily habits are crucial for responding correctly to stress that you need to respond to every single day. People don't understand. Being awake is a stress, period, all the time. There's never a time when you're awake when you shouldn't be experiencing stress. You need to embrace it. And then at night, that's when you should be doing everything you can to relax yourself, to stop stimulus, so that you can actually let your body do the right things to recover from stress. Do that correctly, and you don't need supplements.
But when I see that my REM sleep is not at least hour and a half, I won't be able to function properly. I'm like, okay, let's just train today or do something, because I won't be able to think. So when you get half an hour a day, but a lot of people function like that, and they probably just caffeinate themselves into some kind of alertness state, and never really acknowledge that, hey, there are way better things how to fix this. And I believe both of our goals is to just put it out there that, hey, you don't need million of different supplements. Like at the moment, I'm taking only multivitamin. I don't take anything else, just multivitamin. And I feel great. I go outside all the time. I have 2 or 3 cold showers every day. I train specifically to improve my HRV and resting heart rate. I don't train to improve my muscle mass or something like that. So
Yeah.
I accommodate what I take to my lifestyle and training, and only because I'm well versed with all this. And if people don't understand how much actually comes into play, they will just listen to somebody. Hey, just take this pill. It's going to fix your life.
Yeah, yeah, and almost never does. Acutely, you might feel like it helps, but you're blunting things that should be happening. Another thing that I wanted to point out that's not elucidated in this slide, I talked about how each one of these amino acids in green requires light to break it down into the appropriate backbones for all the orange stuff. But the other thing that needs to happen is you need to be able to have plenty of good oxygen tension. So in order to convert these, once they've been broken down by light, into all these orange things on all of these levels, okay, on this middle one, on the top one, on the bottom one, you also need good oxygen tension. What does that mean? That's why we talk about, hey, take care of your cardiovascular self. And everybody kind of knows that, hey, cardiovascular health is important. This is actually the main base reason why. It has way more to do with this stuff than it does with like making sure that your heart is strong. It has to do with, if you have poor cardiovascular conditioning, you're going to carry oxygen poorly. If you carry oxygen poorly, guess what? These amino acids cannot be turned into all of the orange neurotransmitters and thyroid hormones and all that type of stuff appropriately. It requires light to break down the green stuff, the green amino acids. And then once they're broken down, you require oxygen to turn them that way. When you're hypoxic, so in other words, when you induce a stress training or chemical stress or environmental stress, you become hypoxic. That when they becomes hypoxic, that's when these things on the far right and each one of these can be turned backwards. So oxygen is low, they go backwards from right to left. When oxygen is high, ideally every time you go to sleep, they go from left to right, from the green stuff to the orange stuff.
Would you say this is main mechanisms why so many people that we work with who have had background of doing something athletic when they were young have much faster progressions than anyone else? Let's say somebody in 20 years joins the gym and wants to become a powerlifting champion. It's going to be very, very hard unless they have done something when they were younger kids.
Yeah, I would say this is one of the main mechanisms, right? Because the whole time, especially with this guy right here, this dopamine hormone, they've been consistently being able to turn these 2 green ones here into good thyroid, good dopa, and good melanin and dopamine. You're usually going to find that athletes like that, unless they are like, the only time that I don't correlate that is with athletes that are consistently 100% of the time inside. Gymnastic people are one of those. Then they do struggle a little bit with this because they don't have the sunlight to break these down. But any field sport athlete or any athlete that has grown up with outdoor activity, yeah, they've been able to turn these green ones into the precursors for all of this orange stuff very readily. And that also means that their coordination, because of high dopamine, and their ability to get aggressive with whatever they're doing because of high adrenaline and noradrenaline appropriately is high. That ability has been ingrained in the whole system, which means that when they train and they become hypoxic, they recover, they go backwards in that system very easily as well.
Yeah, this is awesome. I think we could carry on for another 2 hours just on this topic, but we're probably going to leave it to just not overwhelm everyone. I felt like this is an important topic to touch upon, that a lot of people I personally have seen just taking stuff for the sake of taking. Maybe their favorite influencer is telling them to do it or whatever. And as usual, we suggest just go back, watch our first couple of videos where us understanding where you are is as important as understanding where you're going. Because it's pointless to just, hey, I'm going to do this to improve that if you don't know where it started. Knowing all this, where do people go from there? So is there any kind of practical advice that you can give out? Hey, if you're struggling with high cortisol, take either ashwagandha or 7-keto DHEA or melatonin or whatever. Is there some kind of practical guidelines that people can do? Oftentimes we hear, hey, just take ashwagandha at night, every single night, or you already mentioned a couple of times, for instances, hey, if you know you're going to be exposed to stress, maybe you fly from LA to, let's say, Fiji, maybe a couple of days before that, you take some ashwagandha or whatever you would suggest it to do. And then when you land there and you have completely hectic schedule, do some grounding, do some adjustments, look back to our jet lag videos. That will do you more good than taking control of your cortisol.
And in that unique circumstance, that would be like one of the few times where if you're supposed to be inducing a good sleep cycle where you're supposed to land, right? Like say, this is a transcontinental flight. So you need to know, hey, when am I supposed to be sleeping at the time zone where I'm going to be landing? If that's what's happening, then that would be one of the few times where I would actually put that on my timer, on my watch or my phone. And I would take some melatonin on the plane to start inducing that sleep cycle so that when you land, that adjustment period is like 1 day, right? So there are circumstances where the melatonin is useful, right? But you just have to know exactly what you're trying to accomplish, right? The other thing is you mentioned 7-ketone DHEA. That is a thing that can help you transmute more DHEA into your sex hormones, pulling them backwards from the neurotransmitters. Again, that works really well in women, not so much in men. But you know, if you know that sort of thing, then you know it. Like a man, I'm probably not going to use 7-ketone DHEA for that. I'll probably use some other things, but for women, it becomes kind of valuable. Again, you want to have a little bit of blood work to make sure that you have enough DHEA to convert into sex hormones. Because if you start taking 7-ketone and your normal DHEA, your natural DHEA is already low, you actually end up suppressing your cortisol because of what I said earlier. Your DHEA gets turned into cortisol. And if your DHEA is already stressed and you take some 7-ketone, you're going to flow that into sex hormones and no cortisol response. You end up in the same situation of underperforming on a stress response scale. So again, there are nuances to these things. They are useful. And I just kind of described some of the ones where it's like, hey, okay, this kind of makes sense of when I should take it, when I shouldn't take it. But at the end of the day, it's about knowing your blood work and either knowing these things that I'm talking about or working with somebody that does. And that can be valuable for sure. So yeah, I think that's the best I can do, like right off the bat in generic terms. But yes, knowing your personal, just like you said right before this, knowing where you're at, knowing what you're doing, and knowing where you want to be at the end of this stress response. So maybe it's a 2-day flight or a 3-day travel or whatever. That tells you a lot of what you should take and what you shouldn't take.
And I think number one takeaway is they are supplements. They should not be there every single day of your life or even 3 months at a time and whatnot. You only use them sparingly when and as needed. Make sure you understand when you actually need them. If you don't, reach out to somebody who does. And probably experiment with yourself. You know, blood tests are not that expensive. Like in UK, very thorough blood test will cost you around £200, which sounds, hey, it's £200. But you go out for a meal, you're going to spend 100. Don't go out for 2 meals, cook some at home, and that's sorted, you know, and you have taken some kind of accountability for yourself to know where you're at, where you're going, what affects you, what doesn't affect you. And now it's so easy, like same in America. So, well, some countries are still a bit crazy, like in Canada. But you can order those blood testing kits home and you just post them. And in a couple of days, you get everything, all the results you ever needed that help you to improve your health, life, and go from there. So, but yeah, thanks for your time as usual. I see you're frozen again, but I'll speak to you in the next video.